Welcome to This Explainer. I'm so glad you're joining us today because we are going to dive into a topic that literally shapes the daily lives of billions of people, yet it's kind of completely misunderstood. We're talking about human resource management and how it is totally transformed. I mean, it's not just the Department of Paperwork, Payroll, and, rule enforcement anymore. Far from it. Today, HR has evolved into this absolute strategic powerhouse. It's the engine that can quite literally dictate the survival, the purpose, and the profitability of a modern organization.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Because to really grasp where we are today, we kind of have to look back at where we started. Consider this thought from the 19th century, right in the thick of the Industrial Revolution. Robert Owen and Charles Babbage made what was, at the time anyway, a totally radical realization. They figured out that people are an organization's most critical asset. They concluded that employee well-being directly leads to better work. Simply put, without healthy workers, the whole enterprise would just collapse.
So, here's how we're going to unpack this journey today. First, the evolution of human resources. Second, hard versus soft HRM. Third, the strategic HR shift. Fourth, global talent management. And finally, number 5, future-proofing with DEI. All right, Section 1. Evolution of human resources. From the Industrial Revolution to human capital. We've seen a truly fascinating shift in how businesses actually view their workers over time. Starting way back in the 19th century, the focus first shifted toward basic worker well-being. Then, right around 1893, labor economist John R. Commons officially coined the term human resource. But then, rolling into the early 20th century, we hit this phase called Taylorism, or scientific management. This is where the focus pivoted super hard toward manufacturing efficiency. We're talking about viewing labor almost like literal cogs in a machine. Thankfully, jumping to the late 20th century, huge advances in technology and workforce mobility ushered in the human capital era. This was a real game changer. This is where corporations truly began viewing employees as dynamic assets, people full of valuable knowledge rather than just inputs on an assembly line.
So with all that history, how do we actually define this today? Well, human resource management is basically the strategic and coherent approach to the effective and efficient management of people in a company or organization. It's incredibly comprehensive. Think of modern HR as the architect of the workplace. We're talking about managing everything from talent acquisition and long-term strategic planning all the way to legal compliance and employee relations. It's essentially the engine, ensuring the organization achieves its goals through its people.
Moving on to Section 2, hard versus soft HRM, contrasting fundamental philosophies.
So the crucial point here is how sharply these two methodologies contrast with each other. On one side, you've got hard HRM, which is all about the numbers. It heavily prioritizes business goals, raw efficiency, and cost control. Employees are managed strictly through top-down control and pretty rigid rules to ensure maximum productivity. But on the flip side, soft HRM completely flips the script. Think of it like the difference between a rigid 1950s factory floor and a vibrant modern tech startup. Soft HRM actually treats employees as highly valuable assets, not just expendable resources. The focus completely shifts to well-being, personal growth, and job satisfaction. It relies heavily on flexibility and trust to empower the team. So, one prioritizes raw, calculated productivity, while the exact opposite approach bets on job satisfaction to drive those end results.
That brings us to Section 3, the strategic HR shift, aligning people with business goals.
And Opethaw's model of human resource management brilliantly illustrates exactly how complex and integrated this strategic shift really is. Now, I know this concept sounds incredibly dense at first glance, like a giant puzzle, but it perfectly maps out the interconnectedness of all these HR functions. Just notice how everything, from initial job design and recruitment, flows right into performance evaluation, welfare management, and labor relations. None of these things operate in a vacuum. They're all interconnected gears in the exact same machine, and they're heavily influenced by both internal and external environmental pressures.
So, let's break that down into some more digestible steps. Opethaw's complex framework essentially funnels down like this. It starts at Step 1 with meticulous job design and planning, which directly dictates Step 2, staffing and hiring. Once you finally get the right people in the door, it naturally shifts to Step 3, which is development and performance management. And here's the kicker. Doing those first 3 things correctly is exactly what allows a company to achieve Step 4, its strategic goals, all of which culminates in Step 5, realizing the generic purpose. That just means bottom-line organizational success. It's quite literally a direct pipeline from a single simple job description all the way to the company's ultimate survival. But you might be wondering, how do you actually align that pipeline with what the business is trying to achieve? Well, based on the theories of Schuler and Jackson, a company's specific business strategy absolutely dictates how its HR department must operate. For example, if your business strategy is cost reduction, HR needs to manage its people to simply work harder and much more efficiently. Now, if the goal is innovation, HR has to foster an environment where people work differently with open, free thinking. And if your primary goal is quality enhancement, HR needs to train employees to work smarter. The big takeaway here: your business strategy and your HR strategy must be one and the same. You can't have one without the other.
All right, Section 4, Global Talent Management Principles, Recruiting and Deploying the Right People.
The Wharton Ideas Lab actually found that successful global companies consistently adhere to 6 key principles. Let's run through them. First, they ensure HR is in total alignment with the corporate strategy. Second, they maintain strict internal consistency across all their practices. Third, they embed their core values deeply into the cultural DNA of the company. Fourth, they insist on high management involvement. Fifth, they carefully balance global corporate needs with very specific local cultural requirements. And finally, number 6, they completely differentiate their employer brand. But what's absolutely vital to remember here is that trying to implement any of these practices in isolation, it's actually counterproductive. Without internal consistency and deep, genuine management involvement, well, these are really just corporate buzzwords, not an actual talent strategy.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 5, Future-Proofing with DEI, the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
2.3 times more cash flow per employee. I mean, wow, right? This isn't just a wild guess. This is a hard statistic from a Deloitte analysis of highly inclusive companies. It turns out when you remove systemic barriers and foster genuine belonging in the workplace, you aren't just improving employee morale, you are significantly driving up the financial productivity of literally every single person in the organization.
Now, what's really interesting about this next point is how heavily that financial reality is reinforced by even more data. Take McKinsey's Diversity Wins Report, for example. It shows that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 25% more likely to completely outperform their industry peers on profitability. I mean, the ROI of having diverse, equitable teams is just undeniable at this point. In fact, diverse teams are shown to be 87% better at making decisions, simply because they avoid that kind of dangerous, insular groupthink.
So, you're probably asking, how do companies actually achieve this in practice? Well, according to Cooper's 2026 Workplace Trends, there are a handful of high ROI DEI initiatives organizations are adopting right now. We're talking about structured, scaled mentorship programs, which, by the way, are consistently ranked as the highest leverage investment a company can make. We're also seeing a huge rise in blind recruitment and resume reviews to eliminate any early-stage bias. There's also a big push for fully funded employee resource groups that actually have real influence, alongside strict annual pay equity audits. But perhaps the biggest game changer? Tying executive compensation directly to DEI metrics. Because let's be honest, when executive pay is on the line, that's when organizational change actually becomes durable.
To implement those sorts of initiatives effectively, organizations rely on a 5-phase execution framework. First things first, you have to assess exactly where you are with solid baseline data. You can't fix what you don't measure, right? Second, you set SMART goals. And by that I mean not just vague, feel-good aspirations, but specific, measurable targets. Third, you act on your specific gaps, whether that's in hiring, retention, or who gets promoted. Fourth, you build very concrete leadership accountability. And fifth, you constantly measure and iterate. The truth is, DEI is a structural business system that requires continuous measurement and adjustment. It is definitely not just a one-and-done afternoon workshop.
All of which leaves us with this final, really critical question to consider today. Is your organization's human resource management approach stuck in the paperwork of the past, or is it strategically aligned to drive the true purpose and profitability of your future? Because the organizations that are going to win tomorrow are absolutely the ones that realize their human capital is their ultimate competitive advantage today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.